All right, we're back. It's week 3. You've gotten started. You want to keep your momentum going. Let's talk about making your own study guide and assessing a concept versus something you're going to memorize. And we'll talk for just a minute too about websites. So you want to get the big picture. For most of us, most of my students say that really helps to get the big idea first instead of just jumping in on one paragraph and starting to memorize. The memorization is going to be easier if you've got that big concept first. So you want to read the chapter quickly. If there's something that you don't understand, either flag it with a post-it note or put a note on your notepad to ask the professor or to check about it later. But don't bog down, right? If there's something that doesn't make sense in this initial read, you're not going to spend 2 hours trying to figure out that paragraph. Just move on. So outline the main points of your chapter and get the big picture. Think about, does this chapter relate to what we learned last time, or is it totally new? Is there anything that looks like it's going to be particularly difficult? So outline it, leave space that you're going to be able to fill in later. So here Wilson is looking at protein synthesis. And then you're going to fill in the detail in that paragraph. Notice, is this something that once I understand it, I've got it? Is it a big idea that you've just got to kind of wrap your head around? Or is it a detail, right? For example, to me, a concept is that our lungs don't have muscles. The muscles are outside of the lungs, and when those muscles contract, the diaphragm goes down and that pulls the air in. To me, that's a concept, right? The details are which muscles are doing what, right? So it's the external intercostals are contracting and lifting the rib cage. And in some places, there's going to be a whole lot more detail than the diaphragm muscle contracting and pulling down. But if you can get the big concepts first, then the memorizing is going to be much easier. If you try to memorize the big idea, that's just painful, and it doesn't work. It's just frustrating. So if there's something that you're not understanding, particularly on the concepts, if there's something that's not making sense, get the professor to explain it or look it up on the internet. You want to be sure on those websites, what are you looking at? If they're trying to sell you something, that's probably not the best website. If you're studying human biology and physiology, anatomy, things like the CDC, the NIH, Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, UC San Diego, medical school, those are going to be reliable websites. If you're looking at horticulture and agriculture, a state land-grant college is going to have the information you need. So if it's a university, if it's a medical school, if it's a large hospital, most of the government agencies are going to be a reliable website. If it is a mommy blog, if it's just a blog that somebody's putting up, that it might be good information, but you don't know whether it is or not. The WebMD is not really made for the professional. It's made for the patient that's just gotten a diagnosis. So it's really not going to give you the perspective that you need. If you've got a question on your website, ask the professor, right? Is this a good website for me or not? Some of the professors have a place where you can post them on your discussion board and ask other students whether it's good or not. Some are pretty good. There are some YouTube channels that are pretty good, and if those are useful to you, then use them. All right, so hopefully you get those concepts, and hopefully it's fun to get the concept. The memorizing, not so much fun, right? But what we're trying to do is make that memorizing a little bit easier. Sometimes you can find a mnemonic device, right, that helps you remember something. Like my very elegant mother just sat on pins and needles and pins. is a mnemonic device for the planets: Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, Pluto, right? So there are lots of mnemonic devices out there for parts of the body. Some of those are obscene, but if they work for you, you can look them up and use them. Other tools we can use in memorizing are the highlighters. So if you purchased your book, I actually like to have a hard copy of the book that I'm going to keep. If you're going in that career, you may find that that book is useful later. So of course, just using a highlighter to mark that place where you're going to review. That way, when you come back to the book, instead of rereading all that part of the chapter that you already know, or that's kind of just introductory material, you can skip that and go straight to your highlighted material. And then the other thing is the highlighting tape, right? You can get this at a teacher supply store. The nice thing about the tape is you can use it as a highlighter, and then once you've gotten that material, you can remove the tape. So instead of looking at the definition of erythrocyte 30 times, once you go, oh, erythrocyte's a red blood cell, you can remove the tape. Again, if you own the book, sometimes if I'm reading a chapter and I go, yeah, I know that, I just make a little check mark at that, little tiny check mark on that paragraph, so that as I'm reading, I don't have to reread that next time. I know where I was. All right. Of course, you can make flashcards, and that you'll put the question on one side and the answer on the other. And that's nice because as you make them, you're learning. And then those two, once you've got it, once you've said, all right, the radius comes to the thumb side, once you've got that, then you can put that card to the side, right? All right, and so once you have that fact, move on. Do come back maybe a week later and look at those flashcards again, right? If you think you've got them, great, but come back to them again in a week, and then of course you're going to come back to them the night before the exam or 2 days before the exam. Next week we'll talk about preparing for exams. All right, that's memorizing. It's not the favorite thing. You can quiz yourself with the chapters and the questions at the back of the chapter. And a lot of books will have, at the end of the chapter, they'll have concept checks and questions. So write those out. Be honest with yourself when you're doing them, and then they'll have the answers in the back of the book. Write them down, answer them best you can, then look in the back of the book and check. Now, if you miss a question, don't just memorize that answer. Go back to that section of the chapter and read those paragraphs. Reread that whole section, right? And then you're going to review this material several times. Hopefully the night before the exam, you're not having to do a whole lot. And you can quiz your study buddies, right? You can take turns asking one another to explain something. All right, very good. See you next week.